Public enemy, number one, back on wax.
People got something to say. Yeah, come on. As long as the people got something to say.
It's time for Globally Speaking with your host, Christopher Bennett. Heard every Saturday from 11 a.m. to 12 noon Central Standard Time, right here on globalnewsforum.com. And now, your host, Mr. Christopher Bennett.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. You're listening to Globally Speaking on globalnewsforum.com, aired every Saturday from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Central Standard Time. This is Christopher Bennett, your host. I am also the author of Daddy Doesn't Want to Dance Anymore, which can be found on my website, www.christopherlbennett.com. But as of right now, you're listening to the one host with 7 billion voices here on Globally Speaking. Today, we're going to discuss the African American family. The topic is entitled, To the African American Family, May You Rest in Peace. We're going to touch upon the crippling epidemic that's going on in our communities throughout the nation with the crumbling family structure of the African American family. But before then, I want to touch upon some issues that's going on around the world as well as right here in America. First, I would like to discuss the crackdown on Wall Street camps coordinated by U.S. city mayors. If you thought the recent crackdowns on Occupy encampments across the country was more than a coincidence, there's a good chance that you were right. Oakland Mayor Jean Quan admits talking to other cities before the massive coast-to-coast evictions. In an interview this morning with the BBC, Ms. Quan reveals that she spoke with officials from other cities over the phone before Monday morning's raid that led to the eviction of hundreds of Occupy Oakland protesters and the arrest of many more. What had started as a political movement and a political encampment ended up being an encampment that was no longer in control of the people who started them, says the mayor. Perhaps the greatest blow to her city's own Occupy Oakland movement, however, came after repeated raids from local law enforcement agencies, often more than a dozen area forces working in conjunction to infiltrate demonstrations and beat protesters. The mayor goes on to say that protesters in the movement are looking for more stability and blames anarchists that have co-opted the movement for hijacking the cause and disrupting any attempts at achieving peace. Protesters, though the violence coming out of Occupy encampments for the most part has been carried out by law enforcement agencies. In Oakland alone, 2 American military veterans have been seriously injured by police action since police raids on the Occupy encampment there began. Hundreds of police mobilized around parks, showing protest letters, informing them that they need to leave the encampment temporarily. Some protesters refused to leave the parks. They resisted with chants of "Whose park? Our park," as officers began moving and tearing down tents. So, this Occupy Wall Street movement for the past week, starting since earlier this week, has been faced with law enforcement agencies coming in, tearing down their encampments, and forcing them out of the parks, which is so strange considering that when we listen to our public officials and our president, along with our Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, who praised Libya, the people of Egypt, for their protests against their government and for fighting for their rights against the system, here we are having the people doing the same thing here on American soil, and our officials is doing everything they can to wipe them out, to take them out of the equation, to silence them, and not allow their voices to be heard. And yet we're supposed to be a country here to protect, fight, and restore humanity worldwide. Yet it's our humanity that's being violated here on American soil, and our government is doing everything they can to shut it down. So from there, I want to go on to Europe and the crisis that they're facing with the euro. The Eurozone, which is like their economics, their financial stability. In short, they call it the EU. This will go back to what I'm stating here about the Occupy Wall Street. Now we move over to what's going on in Europe with the protests and with the people standing up against their government for faces the same thing that we're facing here, which pretty much coincide with my previous topic from last week and the week before, how America and European nations have become a crackhead due to our economic instability, due to our economic collapse. So, the topic here I have is the last rise of the euro, Europe in the worst crisis since World War II. The Eurozone could be falling apart at the seams, at what German Chancellor Angela Merkel called its toughest hour since World War II. The UK and Germany offer competing versions of the European Union's future as the debt crisis continues to deepen. The debt crisis continues to deepen. This is here in Europe. I'm going to show you how all these dots connect with one another. While incoming Greek Prime Minister Lucas Papadopoulos said Greece has no chance but to remain within the single currency, conservatives balk at the notion of more austerity measures, which they argue have already deepened the country's recession. This is Greece. And while Italy, whose debts come out of 120% of gross domestic products, struggles to avoid a Greek-style bailout that Europe can scantily afford, Greece teeters on the brink of default, which could eject it from the economic and monetary union and send the entire Eurozone into a meltdown. This is Europe. This is Greece. This is Italy. France is also affected by this, as well as the UK. Like I said, our countries are falling apart economically. In trying to restore their economics, they are seeking to strip the resources of not only the people of these countries, their natives, but also to steal the resources from surrounding countries. Now keep in mind, people, like I stated earlier, in the past few weeks, this global economic crisis is only something that's going on here in the United States and in Europe. The rest of these nations are not affected by this economic collapse. Nations like China, and especially a lot of your African nations, independent African nations, and mostly your Arab nations, meaning nations such as Libya, Iran, and I want to say the Arab unions have a surplus. Their economy are pretty much strong due to the murder of Gaddafi and the devastation in Libya. Of course, their economic stability has faltered with NATO and the bombing of that country. But before that transpired, Libya was a financially sound country that was not affected by this global economic collapse. So, like I stated earlier, when a country or when a crackhead needs to feed its fix, need to restore what it has lost, it will come into your home, kick in the back door, and rob you of your resources. Which brings us to the next story that's going on in Libya.